Welcome everyone, Dylan Gemelli here today with a brand new video for you. So today we are going to completely focus on Primobolan. But before we get into Primobolan, I have to reiterate to you, I am not a doctor. Anything that I tell you or any information that I give you is strictly for your entertainment purposes only. I am not insinuating, nor indicating, nor advising you to use any of these products in any way whatsoever. What you do with this information is completely and utterly up to you. So, that being said, let's get into Primobolan while we're all here. So, Primobolan's also known as methanolone, and it's one of the most popular injectables out there for cutting cycles. All right, and you guys have heard me preach and talk about it time and time again. It's no big secret that it's my favorite, but I'm going to give you only the facts here as I always do. I'd say Tren is probably the only compound out there that's more popular in cutting cycles consistently, maybe Winstrol, but Primobolan is extremely popular. One of the reasons that it's so popular is because of Arnold Schwarzenegger. All right, it's clearly one of his favorites. It's not a big secret. He's talked about it in interviews. So old school bodybuilders did use Primobolan a lot for cutting cycles, and they even used them during bulking cycles. You know, there's no bad way to really use it. Obviously, you're not going to bulk with it, but it's nice to add into a bulking cycle to kind of keep it clean or keep things nice and gradual and lean going on within it. But everybody's different on what they prefer. Now, what is it? Well, it's considered fairly weak in comparison to other compounds, which I do understand. If you're trying to compare it to a D-ball, an Anadrol, a Tren, a DECA, of course it's going to appear to be weaker. It has a low anabolic and androgenic ratio, and it's one of the weaker steroids if you just focus on paper. But it is stronger than Masteron, so that's something that you need to consider as well. Since Masteron is always related to cutting cycles, and on paper, Primobolan's stronger. So if you're looking in that, avenue or facet, Primo is going to be considered stronger. Now, it has a huge advantage, though, over many steroids, because it's stronger than testosterone in this aspect. It's stronger at binding to the androgen receptor. So with most DHTs, dihydrotestosterone-related steroids, it's a good aid for fat loss. Don't consider that with weight loss as a complete weight loss drug. So please don't mix my words here and say, well, you said this before. Fat loss and weight loss are two entirely different things. Fat loss, focusing on, certain areas and helping with stubborn fat as opposed to dropping 30, 40, 50 pounds and trying to use steroids to get yourself into shape. Two completely different things. Now, Primobolan does not aromatize. So you're not going to need an aromatase inhibitor with that, so to speak, but chances are you're running it with testosterone, so you still have to worry about that estrogen conversion. But my point is, Primobolan's extremely dry. You don't have to worry about any gynecomastia issues with it, anything of the sort. All right, very, very dry. And everybody's different, but most people don't prefer to hold water on cycle, and Primobolan's a sweet option for that. Now, since Primobolan does increase nitrogen retention, it's been touted as anti-catabolic and somewhat anabolic. So, in simple terms, it helps you keep your muscle mass while you're dieting. And that's one of the biggest reasons it's used on cutting cycles. Now, anecdotally, evidence actually out there shows that by using Primobolan during low-calorie diets, maybe 20, 30, 40% below your BMR, you can actually keep your current lean muscle while gaining new muscle tissue. Now, this seems to be against basic understanding of nutrition. I get that. But we'll just kind of throw this out there to the magic of steroids on what they're capable of doing, which you can obviously do a lot more with them in this regard than you would be able to do without them, and this probably wouldn't be possible without them. In fact, it wouldn't be. I can safely say that multiple people that I know, that I've seen, that I've been around, they have used Primo for pre-contest, for pre-modeling cycles, and have gained lean muscle while losing body fat. All right, this is why everybody's different on their preferences, and you guys know me. I'm not a bodybuilder. Never claimed to be a big bodybuilder. I stay cut year round because that's what I like to do. Okay, I'm not comfortable gaining 30, 40, 50 pounds, being 220, 230. That's just not my comfort level, and that's just not who I am. I'm a sports athlete that is in the fitness industry that loves to work with bodybuilders and athletes and all different types. There is no discrimination whatsoever in my regard. But everybody has their preference. That's why we have bulking steroids like your D-balls, like your anadrols, like your DECAs, and that's why there's cutting steroids. If every single person that used steroids had to be 500 and 600 pounds, then why on earth is there an existence of Anavar, Winstrol, Primobolan, Masteron, etc.? It doesn't even make sense. That's why that when I hear that from people, it's like, what do you where do you come up with this? But you're not going to become a mass monster with Primobolan. And I have seen some guys that are larger in size that are only going after size use Primobolan and say that they hate it. Well, that's because if you're that large, you're probably not going to see it as opposed to somebody my size using it, where you see that gradual lean muscle and it shows more on a smaller frame. But if you're already, just ridiculously peaked out and supremely large, it's probably not going to be something that if you're running it on its own with just test or something where you're going to see a lot from it. Now, if you're throwing it into a bulking cycle, you're going to be able to see it keeping you cleaner and feeling what it does and things like that. But everybody's different. Now, there's two forms of Primo out there. You got your injectable, obviously the most popular version, and there's also oral. All right. Now, both esters of it have benefits, etc. I'm not a big fan of the oral. I'm probably going to do a separate video on it so that we can get into that in more detail, because that's not what we're doing here. We're just kind of going over Primobolan in itself. But there are two forms of it. The oral version to me is not very effective whatsoever. Maybe for females to use it at a lower dose, but for males you have to use a lot of it. It's pricey and it's just not as effective. But to each their own. Now, side effects. This is to me what makes Primobolan so desirable as opposed to others, because the side effects are so low. Of course it's suppressive. It's a steroid. All steroids are suppressive aside from something like Proviron, which I really don't throw into that steroid, loop and whatever, but it's still considered a steroid. But basically, when I say all steroids are suppressive, basically they all are. And that goes for Primobolan as well. Don't believe anybody that tells you don't need post-cycle therapy with Primobolan. That is ridiculous, absurd, not true. All right? Scientific studies have shown that glycoprotein hormones, and those are the hormones responsible for FSH and LH, are decreased by almost 65% after using a small oral dose of Primobolan daily. In addition, the oral version is hard on the liver as well, so you've got to be aware of that. Injectable version, though, there's no estrogen conversion, as I pointed out, right? It's not going to hurt your, hammer your cholesterol, blood pressure, things like that. One thing, it is a DHT derivative, so it can be harsh on the hairline, but really only if you're prone to MPB, male pattern baldness. If not, chances of you having any issues with your hair are pretty low, not impossible. So don't say, oh, Gemelli said it's not possible if I'm not prone to MPB. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's not as likely. Most people that have hair issues with steroids, are prone to male pattern baldness or have some sort of, gene, etc. But like I said, there's always exceptions to rules. So no matter what I say, no matter what anybody else says, there's still exceptions to things. And I always try to point that out. But sometimes, you get talking and you fail to mention certain things like that I assume are common sense, but they're not, because everybody's new to this, and I don't blame you. How about dosage? I've always said that I like to keep my recommendations on dosage moderate. However, there are a few compounds out there, your Primobolan, your Masteron, your Equipoise, that need to be ran a little bit higher than traditional values you might see on other compounds, especially harsher ones. I have seen people run Primo at 400 milligrams and say they enjoy it and that they got good out of it. I say that you probably want to keep it at 500 to 600 on your low end, up to 800 if you're really, more advanced. But that is up to you, because Primobolan is quite expensive. And when you're talking, generally, you're going to see it at 100 when you're taking it in. You rarely see Primobolan come in 200 milligram vials. It's possible, but when you're talking about all that oil injected as well, it can be annoying, problematic, more difficult. So that's something else to consider. But 12 to 14 weeks, 500 to 600 milligrams, generally the range that you're going to want to be in to get the most out of it. But, like I said, Primo, it's on the cleaner end. It's nice, gradual, lean muscle throughout. It's never going to be drastic, but you're going to see that vascularity. You actually will get a small boost in endurance, which is something people generally don't talk about it. So there's a lot of value there if you care about low side effects, nice results, a cycle where you actually feel good most of the time, and one that you can keep, side effects minimal and get some nice lean gains. It's not for everybody. It's faked a lot. It's expensive. So there's things there. But, to me and to a lot of people, it's the best out there. It's not the strongest, but strongest doesn't always equate to the best. But everybody's different. You have to decide your preferences and go from there. So, that being said, www.icearms.com/forums. I'm also on the Evolutionary Forum as well as the Elite Fitness Forum. Dylan@icearms.com is my email. You can get me there with questions, comments, etc. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That being said, stay tuned for plenty more to come. Dylan Gemelli, signing off.